The history books will tell you the West was won by cavalry charges and railroad barons. They're lying. The real West was defined in the silence between a heartbeat and a trigger pull. In 1881, on a desolate ridge in the Arizona Territory, a woman named Louisa Vance made a choice that should have gotten her killed. She didn't just open her door to the devil, she nursed him back to health. They said Chayton was a ghost, a butcher, the most hunted Apache in the territory. But when he returned 3 years later, he didn't come for blood. He came to claim a debt that Louisa didn't even know she owed. This is the story of the Vance Creek incident, a story of betrayal, obsession, and the price of mercy. The wind that night wasn't just weather, it was a warning. It howled down through the Dragoon Mountains, stripping the mesquite bushes bare and rattling the heavy oak door of Louisa Vance's cabin until the iron hinges groaned in protest. Louisa stood by the hearth, her knuckles white as she gripped the stock of her husband's Spencer carbine. She was 28 years old, but the frontier had etched lines around her eyes that belonged to a woman of 40. Since Jeremiah died of the fever 2 winters ago, Louisa had held the Blackwood Ridge property alone. She had defended it against drought, against coyotes, and against the encroaching greed of the Copper King Mining Company. But she had never defended it against him. The local papers in Tombstone called him the Red Shadow. The U.S. cavalry reports, signed by General Crook himself, referred to him simply as Chayton. He was a Chiricahua Apache renegade who had refused the reservation at San Carlos. Rumor had it he had slaughtered a platoon of soldiers in Skeleton Canyon without firing a single shot, using only a knife and the cover of darkness. Louisa knew the stories. Every settler within 100 miles knew the stories. A heavy thud against the side of the barn, distinct from the wind, made her heart hammer against her ribs. It was a wet, heavy sound, like a sack of grain being thrown, or a body falling. Louisa didn't hesitate. Hesitation was a luxury for the civilized, and Blackwood Ridge was far from civilization. She threw the latch, the wind tearing the door from her grip, and stepped out into the driving rain. "Who's there?" she screamed over the gale, leveling the carbine. "I have a gun, and I know how to use it." Lightning cracked, illuminating the yard in a stark, blinding white. There, sprawled in the mud near the horse trough, was a man. He wasn't moving. The rain washed over him, turning the soil beneath him into a dark, rusty slurry. Louisa inched forward, the hammer of her rifle pulled back. As she got closer, she saw the long, black hair plastered to his back, the buckskin shirt torn to shreds, and the distinct moccasins of the Apache. It was him. It had to be. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. If the cavalry found him here, they would burn her house down for harboring a hostile. If he woke up, he would likely slit her throat. The smart choice, the survival choice, was to walk away. Let the cold and the rain finish what the bullet in his side had started. Louisa lowered the barrel. She looked at the blood pooling in the mud. It was mixing with the pristine rainwater, a violation of the earth. Jeremiah would have let him die, she thought. Jeremiah would have put a bullet in his head to make sure. But Louisa wasn't Jeremiah. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and grabbed the man by his arms. He was heavy, dense with muscle, but he groaned as she dragged him. It was a guttural, animal sound. She pulled him inch by agonizing inch across the yard, up the porch steps, and into the warmth of the cabin. She kicked the door shut, locking out the storm. She didn't know it yet, but she had just locked the danger inside with her. The smell hit her first, wet leather, sage, and the overwhelming, metallic copper scent of fresh blood. Louisa lit 3 kerosene lamps, flooding the small room with light. Now that he was laid out on the bearskin rug before the fire, She could see the damage. A bullet had entered his left side, just above the hip. It was a messy wound, likely from a large-caliber revolver. He was burning up with fever. His skin, the color of bronzed earth, was slick with sweat. She boiled water. She tore up her best linen sheet. For 3 hours, Louisa Vance worked with the precision of a surgeon. She had no whiskey to numb his pain, only a piece of leather belt she shoved between his teeth when his eyes fluttered open in delirium. He thrashed once, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was like iron, bruising her skin instantly. Louisa froze. She looked down into eyes that were pitch black, dilated with pain and fury. There was no gratitude in that gaze, only the primal assessment of a predator cornered in a trap. "I am taking the bullet out," she said, her voice trembling slightly, but her chin held high. "Let go, or I leave it in to rot." He stared at her for a long second. The firelight danced in his eyes. Then, slowly, his grip loosened. He passed out moments later. For 3 days, the storm raged outside, trapping them together. Louisa didn't sleep. She sat in the rocking chair with the Spencer carbine across her lap, watching him. He was a terrifying presence even in sleep. He occupied the space with a silent intensity that made the air feel thin. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Louisa was in the kitchen, kneading dough, when she felt eyes on her. She turned. Chayton was sitting up. He had pulled himself against the stone hearth. He was weak, pale beneath his tan, but the lethality had returned to his posture. He looked at the bandaging around his waist, then at Louisa. "Why?" The word was rasped, English spoken with a heavy, clipped accent. Louisa wiped the flour from her hands. "Because I don't dig graves in the rain." He watched her, unblinking. "The bluecoats, the soldiers, they are close." "I know," Louisa said. "Sheriff Silas Thorne was here yesterday morning, asking about tracks." The tension in the room spiked. Silas Thorne was a man who enjoyed his job too much. He was known for bringing in bounties dead because it was less paperwork than bringing them in alive. "You did not tell him," Chayton stated. "It wasn't a question. I told him the rain washed everything away. I told him I'm a widow living alone and I don't look for trouble." Louisa walked over, placing a tin cup of coffee near him, but staying out of arm's reach. "You drink that. Then you eat. Then when your legs work, you leave. That is the deal." Chayton took the cup. His hands were steady now. "You take a risk, woman of the ridge. Silas Thorne is a snake. He bites the hand that feeds him." "I can handle Silas," she said dismissively. Chayton let out a low, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "You think you saved a man. You think this is charity." He took a sip of the scalding coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. "You have interfered with the hunt. When you pull the arrow from the deer, the wolf does not thank you. The wolf looks at you and wonders why you stole his meat." "I'm not afraid of you," Louisa lied. "You should be," Chayton said softly. "I am the reason the doors are locked in Tucson. I am the reason the stagecoach does not run at night." "You're a man bleeding on my rug," Louisa countered, her Irish temper flaring. "And you're welcome." The days turned into a week. An uneasy truce formed. Louisa worked the farm. Chayton healed. He spoke little, but he saw everything. He watched how she checked the perimeter fences. He watched how she counted her meager coin jar. He watched how she looked at the portrait of her late husband with a mixture of grief and anger. One evening, as Louisa sat mending a shirt, Chayton spoke from the shadows. "He did not die well." Louisa looked up, startled. "Who?" "The man in the picture. Your husband." "He died of the fever," Louisa said tightly. "No," Chayton said. He pointed to the window, to the land beyond. He died of this place. The land took him. It eats the weak. Jeremiah wasn't weak. He is dead. You are alive. Chayton stood up. It was the first time he had stood without support. He winced, but held his ground. You have the spirit of the mountain, cat. You fight when there is no hope. Is that a compliment? It is a warning. Chayton walked to the door. He picked up his knife, which Louisa had sharpened and left on the table. He turned to her. The atmosphere shifted. The injured stray was gone. The warrior was back. I go now. Louisa stood up. You're barely healed. The snake is coming, Chayton said. Thorn found my trail. He will be here by sunrise. If I am here, you die. If I am gone, you live. He opened the door. The night air was cool. Chayton, Louisa called out. He paused, half in the shadow, half in the moonlight. Don't come back, she whispered. Please. He didn't look at her. The wind does not ask where it blows, Louisa Vance. And then he was gone. He didn't make a sound. One moment he was there. The next, he had dissolved into the night. When Sheriff Silas Thorne rode up the next morning with 5 deputies, their horses foaming and eyes wild, they found Louisa Vance churning butter on her porch. They tore her barn apart. They checked the cellar. They found nothing but the lingering scent of sage and the undeniable feeling that they had missed death by inches. Louisa watched them leave, her heart pounding. She thought it was over. She thought she had survived the encounter with the red shadow. She was wrong. She hadn't just saved a life. She had altered the balance of power in the territory. And Chayton had a memory like the stone of the mountains. He remembered everything, especially what was owed. 3 years can turn a boy into a man and a widow into a ghost. The seasons had not been kind to Louisa Vance. The drought of '82 had killed half her cattle. The winter of '83 had taken the rest. Now, in the blistering heat of 1884, Blackwood Ridge was less a farm and more a monument to stubbornness. The paint on the cabin was peeling in long, grey strips like dead skin, and the fences leaned lazily toward the earth, tired of standing against gravity. But the land was still valuable. It sat on a strategic aquifer, the only reliable water source between Tombstone and the growing settlement of Bisbee. The Copper King Mining Company knew it, and Sheriff Silas Thorne, now wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal, was their errand boy. It was high noon when Thorne rode up the dusty trail. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 men in pinstriped suits who looked as out of place in the desert as a polar bear in a forge. They carried leather satchels and wiped their sweating foreheads with silk handkerchiefs. Louisa met them on the porch. She didn't have the Spencer carbine this time. She had a double-barreled shotgun, the barrels sawed off to a wicked 12 inches. "Good afternoon, Widow Vance," Thorne called out, his voice smooth as oil on a gun slide. He had gained weight in 3 years, his belly straining against his vest, but his eyes were just as cold. "Put the scattergun down. We're here for business." "I have no business with you, Silas," Louisa replied, keeping the weapon leveled at his horse's chest. "I paid my taxes. I filed my papers." "This isn't about taxes, Louisa," Thorne said, swinging down from his saddle. He signaled the men in suits to stay back. "These gentlemen are from San Francisco. They represent the Copper King interests. They are prepared to make you a very generous offer for the ridge." "I've told you no, 12 times. And 12 times the price has gone down," Thorne said, stepping onto the first stair of the porch. "Louisa, look around. You're starving. You're alone. The Apache raids are getting worse down south. Geronimo is off the reservation again. It's only a matter of time before some war party rides through here and burns this shack to the ground with you inside it." Louisa laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "I've survived worse than Apaches, Silas. I've survived you." Thorne's smile vanished. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so the city men couldn't hear. "You think I don't remember? 3 years ago, the blood on your porch, the tracks that vanished." Louisa's grip tightened on the shotgun. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Thorne hissed. "I think you harbored the Red Shadow, Chayton. And I think if that got out, well, the town wouldn't look kindly on an Indian lover. They might just hang you before the mining company even gets the deed." The threat hung heavy in the stagnant air. It was the first time he had said it aloud. He had been saving it, holding it like a hidden ace card for the moment she was weakest. "Is that a threat, Marshal?" "It's a negotiation strategy," Thorne said, straightening his coat. He pulled a folded document from his pocket and tossed it onto the porch floorboards at her feet. "That's the deed transfer. The price is $50. It's robbery, I know, but it's enough for a stagecoach ticket back east." "And if I don't sign?" Thorne looked out at the horizon, squinting against the glare. "Then I can't guarantee your safety. There are bandits in these hills, ruthless men. It would be a tragedy if they paid you a visit tonight." He tipped his hat. "You have until sundown, Louisa. Sign it or suffer the consequences." He mounted his horse and rode off, the dust billowing behind him like a funeral shroud. Louisa stood there for a long time, staring at the paper. $50. Her husband's life, her sweat, her blood, all worth $50 and a threat. She looked at the sun. It was already beginning its descent. She knew Thorne wasn't bluffing. He wouldn't come back himself. He would send the bandits he spoke of, hired killers who did the dirty work, so the Copper King's hands stayed clean. Louisa went inside. She didn't pack her bags. She didn't look for the ink to sign the deed. She began to load every gun in the house. She poured the last of her black powder into canisters, shoving fuses into them to make crude grenades. She boarded up the windows with planks she ripped from the dining table. She wasn't leaving. If they wanted Blackwood Ridge, they would have to sift through the ashes to find the deed. She sat in the center of the room, the shotgun on her lap, and watched the light fade from the sky. The silence of the desert was absolute. Then, just as the moon crested the ridge, the coyotes stopped howling. The attack began at 2 a.m. There was no warning, no shout to surrender, just the shattering of glass as a Molotov cocktail sailed through the upper window of the loft. The flames caught the old dry wood instantly, licking up the curtains. Louisa was ready. She fired blindly through the slat in the window, the shotgun roar deafening in the small space. A man screamed outside, a sharp, cut-off yelp. "Burn her out!" a voice bellowed from the darkness. It was a rough, gravelly voice. Not Thorne. This was Dutch Van Doren, a notorious gunman known for working the border towns. Bullets punched through the oak walls, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Louisa scrambled across the floor, coughing in the rising smoke. She grabbed one of her homemade powder bombs, lit the fuse with a trembling hand, and tossed it out the back door. Boom! The explosion shook the cabin. Dust rained down from the ceiling. "She's got dynamite! Flank her! Get around the back!" Louisa retreated to the kitchen. The heat was becoming unbearable. The front of the house was fully engulfed. She could hear them moving, boots crunching on the gravel, closing the circle. There were at least 6 of them. Too many. She checked her pockets. 3 shells left. She was going to die here. The realization didn't bring fear. It brought a strange, cold clarity. She would take as many as she could. Suddenly the shooting stopped. It wasn't a gradual ceasefire. It was instant. One moment the air was filled with lead and shouting. The next, there was only the crackle of the burning roof. "Dutch!" a man called out from the front yard. "Dutch, where you at?" Silence. "Miller, you see anything?" Louisa pressed her back against the stove, shotgun raised. What were they doing? Was this a trick? Then she heard it. A sound she hadn't heard in 3 years, the sound of a heavy body hitting the earth with a wet thud. "Oh, God!" someone screamed. "He's here! He's—" The scream was cut short by a sickening gurgle. Panic erupted outside. It wasn't the organized chaos of a raid anymore. It was the frantic terror of prey realizing the hunter had arrived. Gunshots rang out wildly, aiming at nothing. "Shoot him! I can't see him! There, in the shadows! No, wait!" Louisa heard a horse whinny in terror, then the sound of hooves thundering away. One of them had run. The others weren't so lucky. She heard the distinctive thwip of an arrow, followed by the heavy crunch of a war club. It was brutal, efficient, and fast. In less than 2 minutes, the 6 hired guns who had come to burn her alive had been silenced. Louisa stood up, her legs shaking. The smoke was thick, stinging her eyes. The roof groaned overhead. The beams were giving way. She had to get out. She kicked open the back door and stumbled out into the cool night air, coughing violently. She fell to her knees in the dirt, gasping for oxygen. The yard was a slaughterhouse. Bodies lay twisted in the moonlight, arrows protruding from chests, throats slashed. It was a scene of absolute savagery, and standing in the center of it, illuminated by the burning pyre of her home, was Chaitin. He looked different. He was broader, his chest scarred with white lines of old battles. He wore a mixture of Apache buckskin and a Union officer's coat, unbuttoned and stained with dust. His hair was longer, loose and wild. In his hand, he held a heavy Winchester repeater, and at his hip, a knife that dripped dark fluid. He wasn't looking at the bodies. He was looking at her. Louisa wiped the soot from her face, staring up at him. She expected relief to wash over her, but instead she felt a chill deeper than the night air. The look in his eyes wasn't the look of a savior. It was the look of a man who had come to collect. He walked toward her, stepping over the body of Dutch Van Doren without glancing down. He stopped 3 feet away. The heat from the burning house flushed his face with orange light. "You are a difficult woman to kill, Louisa Vance," he said. His English was better now, sharper. "You came back," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the burning cabin, watching the roof finally collapse inward with a shower of sparks. The symbol of her resistance, her husband's legacy, was gone. "The white man, Thorn. He wants this land," Chaitin said. "He wants the water," Louisa corrected, standing up slowly. "He sent these men." "I know." Chaitin turned his gaze back to her. "Thorn is a disease, but he is a symptom. The world is closing in." "Thank you," Louisa said, dusting off her skirt, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "You saved my life again. That makes us even." Chaitin stepped closer, invading her space. The intensity of his presence was overwhelming. "Even?" He shook his head slowly. "You saved me once. I have saved you twice, but that is not why I am here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled piece of parchment. It wasn't the deed Thorn had thrown at her. It was a map, an old military map. "I did not come for charity," Chaitin said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I did not come because I care for your laws or your property." "Then what do you want?" Louisa demanded, fear creeping back in. "Money. I have none. The farm is gone." "I do not want your money." Chaitin grabbed her left hand. His grip was calloused and warm. He turned her hand over, exposing the palm, as if reading a fortune. 3 years ago, you made a choice. You stepped between the wolf and the hunter. In my culture, when you pull a man from the river of death, You are responsible for the life he lives afterwards. He looked her dead in the eye. And when I pull you from the fire, you belong to me. Louisa tried to pull her hand away, but he held fast. I belong to no one. You have no home. Chaitan gestured to the pile of ash. You have no allies. Thorn will return with an army when he finds his men dead. You are a ghost here, Louisa Vance. You are dead to this world. He released her hand. I am going north, to the Sierra Madre, to the stronghold where the cavalry cannot follow. You are coming with me. Louisa stared at him, stunned. You're kidnapping me? I am claiming you, Chaitan corrected. You proved you have the heart of a warrior. I need warriors, and you. You have a debt. You saved the monster, Louisa. Now you must walk in the dark with him. And if I refuse? Chaitan gestured to the open desert. Then stay. Thorn will hang you for these murders. He will say you conspired with the Apache. He will make it a show. He mounted his horse, a massive black stallion. He reached a hand down to her. The Louisa Vance who lived in a cabin is dead, he said. Ride with me, or die alone in the dust. Choose. Louisa looked at the burning ruins of her life. She looked at the bodies of the men who had tried to kill her. She thought of Silas Thorne's smiling face. She realized Chaitan was right. There was no going back. The civilized world had rejected her. She looked up at the Apache's hand. It was a hand of blood, but it was the only hand offered. Louisa Vance took it. They rode by night. For 3 weeks, they existed in a world of silver moonlight and long, stretching shadows. The Arizona Territory gave way to the harsh, unforgiving expanse of the Mexican borderlands, a place where God, if he existed, rarely visited. Louisa Vance learned that pain was not a feeling, but a state of being. Her thighs were raw from the saddle, her skin cracked by the sun and wind, her lips split. The corset and petticoats of the civilized woman were gone, discarded miles back in a dry arroyo. She now wore a pair of rough canvas trousers scavenged from a dead prospector, and a flannel shirt that hung loosely on her thinning frame. She rode a roan mare Chaitan had stolen from a picket line near Bisbee. He rode ahead, always ahead, a silhouette against the stars. They spoke little. Language was unnecessary when survival was the only conversation. Louisa learned to read the tilt of his head. Left meant water, right meant danger. A sharp halt meant silence, or die. One night, camped in the skeleton of a slot canyon near the Sierra Madre foothills, the silence broke. Chaitan was stripping a rabbit he had snared. The fire was small, built in a pit to hide the light. Louisa sat opposite him, cleaning the Winchester repeater. She had become proficient with it. The weight of the gun felt more natural in her hands now than a rolling pin ever had. "My father," Louisa said, her voice raspy. "He used to read the Bible every Sunday. He said the wilderness was where the devil tested the faithful." Chaitan tossed a piece of meat onto the hot stone. "Your father was a wise man to fear the land. But he was wrong about the devil. The devil does not live in the rocks. He wears a badge and lives in Tombstone." Louisa looked up. "Thorn, how does he know where we are? We've crossed rivers. We've ridden on stone. He's still behind us. I can feel him." Chaitan paused. He looked at the fire. "He has a tracker, a shadow wolf. An Apache? A scout, one who sold his soul for whiskey and silver coins. His name is Cale. We grew up together in the Dragoon Mountains. He knows how I think. He knows where I go before I do." Louisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Then why keep going south? If he knows you, he knows you're heading for the stronghold. "Because," Chaitan said, slicing a piece of cooked meat and handing it to her on the blade of his knife. "I am not running to hide, Louisa. I am running to choose the ground where I fight." He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, the hardness in his eyes softened, just a fraction. "And you," he added. "You are not a prisoner anymore. You could have turned back at the border. You could have shot me while I slept." Louisa took the meat. She didn't look away. "I told you, I have nothing to go back to." "That is a lie," Chayton said softly. "You have fear. Fear keeps people in the cities. It keeps them in the churches. You have anger. It burns hotter than this fire." "Is that why you took me?" Louisa asked. "Because I'm angry." "No," Chayton said. He leaned back, blending into the darkness. "I took you because you are the only white person I have met who looked at my wounds and saw a man, not a savage. When the end comes, I do not want to die surrounded only by enemies." It was a confession, stark and brutal. He wasn't building a life with her. He was preparing for his death, and he wanted a witness who understood the tragedy of it. Their moment was shattered by a sound, the distant, rhythmic thud of hooves. Chayton was on his feet instantly, kicking dirt over the fire. "They are closer than I thought. Kyle is pushing the horses to death." "How far?" Louisa whispered, grabbing her rifle. 2 miles, maybe less." Chayton grabbed her arm. "We must enter the Devil's Spine tonight. If we cross the ridge before sunrise, we lose them in the vertical rock. If they catch us on the flat—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They mounted up, the horses skittish and tired. The Devil's Spine was a notorious trail, a narrow goat path carved into a sheer cliff face with a 2,000-foot drop into the canyon below. As they began the ascent, the moon slipped behind a cloud. Darkness swallowed them. The only sound was the clatter of hooves on loose shale and the terrifying sound of rocks tumbling into the abyss. Halfway up the trail, disaster struck. Louisa's mare stumbled. The shale gave way beneath its rear hoof. The horse shrieked, a terrifying human-like sound, and scrambled for purchase. Louisa was thrown. She hit the narrow ledge hard, rolling toward the edge. Her fingers scrabbled against the dirt, finding only loose gravel. Her legs swung out over the void. "Louisa!" Chayton didn't shout. He roared. He leaped from his stallion, landing on the ledge with cat-like balance. He lunged, grabbing her wrist just as gravity took hold. For a second, they hung there. Louisa dangled over nothingness, the wind rushing up from the canyon floor, tugging at her boots. Chayton lay flat on the ledge, his muscles straining, the veins in his neck bulging. "Do not let go," he gritted out. "I can't! I'm slipping!" Louisa cried, her hand slick with sweat. "Look at me," Chayton commanded. His eyes locked onto hers, fierce and demanding. "You did not survive the fire to die on a rock. Pull!" With a heave that defied physics, he dragged her up. She collapsed onto the ledge, gasping, her heart hammering against the stone. Chayton didn't give her time to recover. He pulled her to her feet. But as they stood, a gunshot echoed from the valley floor below. A bullet chipped the rock face inches from Chayton's head. They looked down. Far below, illuminated by the faint return of the moonlight, were 5 riders. And leading them, looking through a long brass telescope, was Marshal Silas Thorne. "A good shot," Chayton murmured, touching the rock where the bullet had hit. "But not good enough." He pushed Louisa toward his stallion. "My horse is stronger. He will carry 2. We leave the mare." "Leave her." Louisa looked at the frightened animal. "She has a broken leg," Chayton said, his voice void of emotion. He drew his knife. "She cannot walk, and she will make noise." Louisa turned away. She heard the swift, mercy-killing slice and the heavy slump of the body. When Chayton returned, his knife was cleaned, but his eyes were dark. "Now," he said, swinging up behind her on the black stallion. We ride for the sky. The stronghold wasn't a fortress. It was a tomb. Louisa had expected a village, a hidden valley of Apache warriors. What she found was a box canyon, steep-walled and impregnable, occupied by the remnants of a dying dream. There were only 12 of them, 3 old men, 5 women, 2 children, and 2 young warriors who looked more like skeletons than soldiers. They were starving. When Chaitan rode in, the hope that lit their faces was heartbreaking. They thought he brought food, or guns, or an army. Instead, he brought a white woman and a black stallion that was nearly dead from exhaustion. The welcome was cold. An old woman, her face a map of wrinkles, spat at Louisa's feet. "You bring the Deathbringer," she rasped in Apache, which Chaitan translated later. "She smells of the white towns. She fights like a lion," Chaitan defended, dismounting, "and she is under my protection." That night, the reality of their situation set in. They were trapped. The box canyon had only one entrance, the narrow gorge they had just ridden through. There was a spring at the back, trickling out of the rock, but there was no game. They had eaten the last of their dried corn weeks ago. Louisa sat apart from the group, near the spring. She washed her face, the cool water doing little to wash away the dread. Chaitan approached her. He looked diminished here. In the wild, he was a mythic figure. Here, among his starving people, he was just a leader who had failed. "Thorn is coming," Louisa said. It wasn't a question. "He will be at the mouth of the canyon by tomorrow noon," Chaitan admitted. "He will bring the Gatling gun. I saw the wheel tracks back at the crossing." "A Gatling gun?" Louisa's blood ran cold. "Against 12 starving people?" "Thorn does not want a fight. He wants an execution. He wants to wipe us from the map so the Copper King can say the land is safe." Louisa looked at the children, huddled together under a blanket. "We have to run. Is there another way out?" "There is a goat path up the back wall," Chaitan said, pointing to the sheer cliff behind them. "Steep, dangerous, but the women and children can make it if they start now. It leads deeper into the mountains, to the Yaqui country." "Then why aren't they moving?" "Because they need time," Chaitan said. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Thorn will see them on the wall. He will shoot them down like birds. Someone must hold the entrance. Someone must make Thorn believe we are all still down here, fighting." Louisa realized then what the plan was. "You're staying," she said. "I am the war chief," Chaitan said simply. "It is my price to pay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a gold locket. Louisa gasped. It was hers, the one she had pawned 3 years ago in Tombstone to buy seed corn. "How?" "I took it from Thorn's saddlebag when I raided his camp 2 nights ago," Chaitan lied. Louisa knew he had likely carried it for years, having stolen it back from the pawnbroker long before. "Take it. Go with the women. Climb the wall." Louisa looked at the locket, then at the narrow gorge entrance. She imagined Chaitan standing there alone, facing a Gatling gun. "No," she said. Chaitan frowned. "This is not a debate, Louisa. You're right, it's not." She stood up, dusting off her trousers. She checked the load in her Winchester. "You said you needed a warrior. You said I was the only one who saw you as a man." She walked closer to him, invading his personal space, her blue eyes blazing with a ferocity that matched his own. "If I climb that wall, I go back to being a widow who ran away. I go back to being nothing. But if I stay—" She cocked the rifle. "If I stay, I get to put a bullet in Silas Thorn." Chaitan stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind sighing through the canyon. He looked at her, not as a woman he had saved, but as an equal, a partner in blood. Slowly, a grim smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. "It will be a bad death," he warned. "I've died 12 times already," Louisa replied. "One more won't hurt." October 8th, 1884. Noon. The sun was high and unforgiving when Marshal Thorne arrived. He didn't come quietly. He came with 20 deputies and a mule-drawn wagon, carrying a gleaming, brass-barreled Gatling gun. They set up at the choke point of the canyon entrance, 200 yards away. Louisa and Chayton lay behind a barricade of fallen rocks. Behind them, the canyon was empty. The women and children had left hours ago, their progress silent and slow up the back wall. "Chayton!" Thorne's voice boomed, amplified by the canyon walls. "I know you're in there, and I know you have the girl. Send her out, and I'll make it quick for you." Chayton looked at Louisa. Last chance. Louisa rested her cheek against the wooden stock of the rifle. She adjusted her sight, aiming not at Thorne, who was hiding behind the wagon, but at the man manning the crank of the Gatling gun. "Tell him to go to hell," Louisa whispered. Chayton cupped his hands around his mouth. "Come and get her, Silas. She is right here." Thorne stood up, waving his hat. "Have it your way. Open fire." The man on the wagon grabbed the crank. Crack! Louisa fired. The bullet flew true, striking the gunner in the shoulder. He spun away, screaming. "They're fighting back!" The canyon erupted. Bullets sparked off the rocks, filling the air with lethal bees. The Gatling gun roared to life as another man took the crank, chewing up the earth and stone around them. Louisa and Chayton stayed low, firing only when the gun jammed or reloaded. They were pinned, they were outgunned, they were going to die. But they held the line. For an hour, they held them back. Every minute they bought was a mile for the women and children. Then, the shooting stopped. "Reloading," a voice shouted from the deputies. Chayton checked his ammunition. 3 bullets, he said. 2, Louisa replied. They looked at each other. They were covered in dust, bleeding from shrapnel cuts, deafened by the noise, and they were alive. "They are coming," Chayton said, listening to the ground. "They are rushing the barricade." He dropped his rifle and pulled his knife. He pulled a second knife from his boot, a heavy Bowie knife, and handed it to Louisa. "The rifle is empty," he said. "Now we dance." Louisa took the knife. Her hand didn't shake. "Together," she said. "Together," Chayton echoed. They stood up as the wave of deputies, led by a furious Silas Thorne, crested the barricade. The final battle for the Vance Creek legacy had begun. The collision was deafening. It wasn't the sound of gunfire anymore. It was the sickening crunch of bone against wood, the wet tear of knives through cloth and flesh, and the primal screams of men reduced to animals. Chayton moved like a whirlwind. He didn't fight like a man looking to survive. He fought like a man already dead. He ducked under a swinging rifle butt, driving his knife up into the ribs of a deputy, then spun, using the dying man as a shield against a revolver shot from another. Louisa was not a soldier. She was a farmer's wife. But rage is a universal weapon. When a deputy with a red beard lunged at her, grabbing her by the throat, she didn't panic. She remembered the nights alone on the ridge. She remembered the burning cabin. She drove the heavy Bowie knife into his thigh with both hands, twisting it until he screamed and let go. As he fell, she scrambled back, gasping for air, her eyes wild. "Get them down! Stop shooting, you idiots! You'll hit me!" Thorne was screaming, wading into the fray with his pearl-handled Colt revolver drawn. The deputies were hesitant. The smoke, the dust, and the sheer ferocity of the 2 defenders had spooked them. They had expected a surrender, not a meat grinder. Chayton was slowing down. He had taken a bullet to the shoulder earlier, and now a knife slash across his chest was bleeding freely. He dropped a man with a throat chop, but stumbled. That was the opening Silas Thorne had been waiting for. Thorne stepped forward, cool and precise, and fired. Bang! The bullet caught Chayton in the leg. The big Apache buckled, hitting one knee. Bang! The second shot hit the dirt inches from Louisa's face, spraying rock shards into her eyes. She flinched, blinding her for a split second. In that moment, Thorne was on her. He kicked the knife from her hand and grabbed a handful of her hair, wrenching her head back. "Enough!" Thorne roared. The fighting stopped instantly. The remaining deputies, 7 left, standing out of 20, backed away, chests heaving. The canyon fell silent, save for the groans of the dying and the hiss of the wind. Thorne stood triumphant, his gun pressed against Louisa's temple. Chayton was on his knees, 10 feet away, bleeding from 3 wounds, trying to rise but failing. "Look at you," Thorne sneered, his face flushed with adrenaline. The great red shadow, brought to his knees by a bureaucrat. Chayton looked up. His eyes were glazing over, but the fire in them was unquenched. "You have won nothing, Silas. The women are gone. The children are safe." "For now," Thorne laughed. "I'll hunt them down, just like I hunted you. And this—" He shook Louisa, who winced but refused to cry out. "This is your legacy? A white whore who betrayed her race? She is more warrior than you will ever be," Chayton rasped. Thorne cocked the hammer of his Colt. The click echoed like a crack of thunder. "Say goodbye, Louisa. You're going to be a footnote in my memoirs." Louisa looked at Chayton. She didn't look at the gun. She locked eyes with the man she had saved, the man who had dragged her from the fire. There was no fear in her heart anymore, only a strange, quiet peace. "I'm ready," she whispered. Thorne tightened his finger on the trigger. Click! But the gun didn't fire. It wasn't a misfire. The hammer had fallen, but there was no explosion. Thorne frowned, confused. He looked at the gun. He had loaded it that morning. "Trouble, Marshal," a voice called out from the rocks above. Thorne spun around, dragging Louisa with him. Standing on a ridge 20 feet above them, outlined against the sun, was Cale, the shadow wolf. The Apache scout who had tracked Chayton for 3 years, the man Chayton said had sold his soul. Kyle held a Winchester rifle, aimed casually at Thorne's chest. "Cale!" Thorne barked. "What are you doing? Shoot the Indian!" "I am looking at the Indian," Cale said calmly, "and I am looking at the white man. And I am wondering, which one is the savage?" "I pay you!" Thorne screamed. "I own you!" "You paid for a tracker," Kyle said. "You did not pay for a butcher." Kyle's eyes shifted to Chayton. A silent message passed between the two men, a lifetime of shared history, of blood feuds and broken treaties, resolved in a single glance. Cale had seen Chayton defend the white woman. He had seen the white woman bleed for the Apache. The lines had blurred. "Drop the gun, Cale, or I'll have you hanged," Thorne threatened, though his voice wavered. "You emptied your gun, Silas," Kyle said softly. "I counted 6 shots." Thorne froze. He looked at his revolver. He had fired twice at the start, twice during the charge, and 2 just now at Chayton and Louisa. He was empty. Louisa felt his grip loosen. That was all she needed. She stomped down on Thorne's instep with her boot heel, driving it into the bone. Thorne howled and stumbled back. Louisa dove for the Bowie knife lying in the dust. Thorne scrambled for his belt, trying to reload. "Kill them! All of them!" he screamed to his deputies. But the deputies didn't move. They looked at Kyle on the ridge with his rifle. They looked at the pile of dead bodies. They looked at the crazy woman with the knife and the dying war chief. "I ain't getting paid enough for this," one deputy muttered. He holstered his gun and turned around, walking back toward the canyon entrance. "Me neither," another said. "Come back! That's desertion!" Thorne shrieked. He finally managed to jam a cartridge into his cylinder. He raised the gun toward Louisa. But Louisa was faster. She didn't stab him. She threw the knife. It was a clumsy throw, tumbling end over end, but guided by 3 years of rage. The heavy blade struck Thorn in the chest, the hilt slamming into his sternum, knocking the wind out of him and sending him sprawling into the dirt. He gasped, dropping the gun, clutching his chest. He wasn't dead, but he was broken. Louisa stood over him, her chest heaving. She picked up his pearl-handled Colt. She looked at the single bullet he had managed to load. "Do it!" Thorn wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Make yourself a murderer, Louisa. Be just like him." Louisa looked at the gun. Then she looked at Chayton. Chayton had managed to stand. He limped over to her, his hand pressing against his bleeding side. He reached out and gently took the gun from her shaking hand. "No," Chayton said. "He deserves it," Louisa wept. "He took everything." "He took your house," Chayton said. "He took your land. Do not let him take your soul." Chayton turned the gun in his hand. He looked down at Silas Thorn, the man who had hunted him across a territory. "Go," Chayton said. Thorn blinked, disbelief in his eyes. "What?" "Leave this place," Chayton commanded. "Tell them you killed us. Tell them the Red Shadow and the Widow are dead. Tell them the vultures ate our bones." "Why?" Thorn whispered. "Because a ghost is harder to hunt than a man," Chayton said. He fired the gun, not at Thorn, but into the air. The shot echoed, signaling the end of the battle. Thorn scrambled backward, crab-walking until he could stand. Then he ran. He ran past his dead men, past the Gatling gun, and out of the canyon, disappearing into the heat haze. Kyle lowered his rifle. He nodded once to Chayton, then turned and vanished into the rocks, a shadow returning to the wild. Louisa and Chayton were alone. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a debt paid. Louisa walked to Chayton. She tried to bandage his chest with a strip of her shirt. "We have to go," she said. "He'll come back, or others will." "No," Chayton said, leaning heavily on her. "Thorn is a coward. He will claim the victory. He will write the report. He will say we died here." He looked around the canyon, at the high walls that had been their prison and were now their sanctuary. "We are dead, Louisa Vance," he said softly. "The world believes it. And that makes us free." Louisa looked at him. She saw the blood, the scars, and the savage grace of the man. She realized he was right. Louisa Vance of Blackwood Ridge had died in the fire 3 weeks ago. The woman standing here was someone else. "Where do we go?" she asked. Chayton pointed south, deeper into the Sierra Madre, toward the blue haze of the unmapped mountains. "To the place where the maps end," he said. "To the place where they cannot follow." He offered her his hand, the same bloody hand he had offered that night at the burning cabin. "Are you coming, woman of the ridge?" Louisa took it. She didn't look back at the bodies. She didn't look back at the north. "I'm coming," she said. They limped toward the black stallion, which stood waiting faithfully by the spring. They mounted up, 2 broken figures against the vastness of the landscape, and rode slowly toward the southern pass. Behind them, the wind picked up, burying the bodies in dust, erasing the tracks, and sealing the legend of Vance Creek forever. Official records from the territory of Arizona state that, on October 8, 1884, the renegade Apache, known as Chayton and his accomplice, the widow Louisa Vance, were killed in a shootout with U.S. Marshals in a box canyon south of the border. Marshal Silas Thorn was hailed as a hero and later became a senator, though it was said he never slept without a light on and refused to ever speak of the incident. But here is the thing about history. It's written by the victors, but the truth is written in the land. In 1902, a prospector deep in the Sierra Madre reported stumbling upon a hidden valley. He said he was met by an old white woman with blue eyes and a tall Apache man who walked with a limp. They gave him water, fed him, and sent him on his way with a warning never to return. Did they survive? Or was it just a trick of the heat? We'll never know for sure. But in the Wild West, a good story is worth more than the truth. And the story of the widow who saved the wolf is one of the best. What do you think? Did Silas Thorne let them go, or did they really escape to live out their days? Let me know your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next dive into the untold stories of the American frontier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the trail.